Hello and welcome to Painting with Rob Boss. Today we're going to be painting an inky cat. You are going to need watercolor paper, a pencil, a brush, India ink, a dish with wells for mixing ink, a cup of water, a paper towel, and a pen.
We're gonna paint, don't tell me that you ain't. We're gonna draw, cause I'm laying down the law. We're gonna art, if you don't like it, smell a flower. Cause I'm out there without power. Who's the boss? Who's the boss? Who's the boss? If you haven't lost, it's Painting with Rob Boss.
Hello and welcome to Painting with Rob Boss. Today we're going to be drawing a cat. We're going to be doing this in ink, but we're going to start out by sketching it out in pencil. So I'm starting out here by sketching out the head, and I'm just going to kind of sketch in the basic form of the cat here. Drawing an ear. I don't need to get too much detail here because we're going to be adding ink in. I do want to kind of sketch this lightly so that the ink will cover up my drawing marks later on. So so here's the head. The head is generally circular shaped. You got some little curved triangles for the ears. And we're coming down into the chest area. And the legs kind of make this natural V shape, kind of a curved V shape in the chest. I'm going to draw the legs in right here and here. And let's start working on the back. Come down this way. Then you got this hunch. The back kind of comes down sharply and then curves immediately and wraps around like this. We don't need a lot of detail to this sketch. We can keep it pretty simple. We're just basically trying to map out the space. We want to keep it simple, but also try to keep it accurate. Alright, so we're bringing the legs down here. I want to pay attention to kind of the general shape of the cat and then the layout of the details. The main things we need to look for here are that we've got the kind of outline of the cat and we've got these two legs mapped out. We're going to add some facial features to it eventually. That's kind of the goal here. Let's add those in. So we got the eyes kind of up here. Kind of wide almond-shaped eyes, basically. They're kind of looking up. So this doesn't have to be exactly like the reference image that's been included. The main goal is really to use the ink techniques. It's not necessarily about getting an accurate drawing. If we can do that, that's great. That's a good bonus. But it's really more about exploring the techniques than it is about having an exact product. So feel free to stylize this a little bit, make it a little more to your liking. Heck, if you want, you can even draw a different cat as long as you follow the procedure I'm laying out here. So yeah, this is about as complicated as we need this sketch to be. If you have any finishing touches you want to put on it, that's fine, but this is about where we need to be with this drawing. Feel free to pause here if you need to catch up. We're going to move on and start sketching out the shadow areas next. Alright, so now we're going to kind of map out the shadow areas. So what we're looking for is those terminator lines where the shadows end. So I'm looking for anything that has a value of 4 or darker on like a 5-point value scale. I'm just trying to sketch in the edge of those shadows, or the edges of those shadows. So we got a big shadow over here on the cat's body behind the leg. And then over here we got another shadow between the two legs here. Up here we've got kind of a little bit of shadow under the chin. And my shape doesn't have to be 100% accurate necessarily. I just want kind of a general idea of where I'm going to be adding that ink to. And all of this shadow up here is going to be kind of blended and transitioned. So we don't have to have like 100% accurate. We just want to get where the bulk of the shadow is. And there we go. All right, you can pause here if you need to. We're going to start adding in ink. So I've got India ink here. I've also got a piece of scrap paper, and that's to test how dark my ink washes are. I'm going to need to be adjusting my ink by adding more ink or water to the mixture. So it's useful to have a piece of scrap paper around that I can test out my ink on. So here I've got my ink wells. I've got 6 wells here. You can use one of those. You can use a palette with wells, anything like that. And there's my water cup as well. So I'm going to mix ink and water, and I'm trying to get an ink wash that's not entirely black. I want it to be a little lighter than that, so that when I add black over it, the black will show through. Another thing to remember with the ink is it dries lighter than it goes on. When the ink dries, it's going to lighten a little bit. So we want to be mindful of that. You might let it dry a little bit to get an idea of how much that's going to happen. So I'm going to block in all of my shadow areas. Now the ink wash I'm using looks fairly dark, but it's actually going to dry lighter. And you can see as I start to spread it out, it gets lighter and it gets kind of thinned out. With ink, you want to err on the side of making things a little bit lighter on your first pass, because it's really easy to darken the ink. It is much more difficult to make it lighter. So try to err on the side of having the ink too light if you're going to err at all. If you can do it perfect, that's even better. So all I'm doing is filling in the entirety of this shadow shape. And I'm kind of looking at my reference image to get kind of the details. I want to apply a little bit of texture here since I'm painting on fur. So I'm doing the transition in a way that kind of mimics the texture of the fur. And then I'm going to add my other shadow in over here. And just kind of same thing, fill that shape up. So we have a lot of curves on this surface, so we're going to be using a lot of gradients. So we're going to kind of subtly transition those edges into the lighter areas. But for now, we just want to block in all the shadows. We want to keep it real simple. A good strategy is to squint at your reference image or your subject to kind of simplify it and get a better breakdown of where those shadow shapes are at. Now I'm going to sketch in some of the shadow shape up here on the forehead. There's kind of an interesting coloration pattern there that I want to get. So I want to sketch that in a little bit to help me when I lay the ink down. So it kind of goes up onto the forehead here, and then it kind of spreads into the cheek and face area here. Looks kind of like this to me. Again, you don't have to be perfectly accurate with this. This is just kind of a guideline. As you add the ink, you can adjust and make changes as needed. So now I want to have like a little bit of a kind of highlight around the body here. You can see the way the light's hitting it. It makes the sort of an aura almost around this cat. So I'm going to be painting in some background, and then I'm going to be painting the cat to a shade of gray. So I want to kind of sketch out where that highlight sort of begins, so that I remember to keep that when I apply the ink and when I'm coloring in the background. So I'm kind of sketching in the line of that highlight there. As long as I keep my pencil marks lighter than the ink, it should blend right in and be no problem at all. So you can sketch out as much of these kind of tonal maps as you need to. But again, you don't need a whole lot. Just kind of key things that you don't want to miss when you add the ink in are a good idea. At this point, I'm going to go back to the ink. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start painting in a little bit of the background. Specifically, I'm going to start by focusing on this kind of almost making an outline for the cat. I don't want to actually draw an outline necessarily. I just want to make the form of the cat by contrasting the figure and the background. But I'm starting to paint in the background here. I'm going to do kind of a border line to start, and then I'm going to add the rest of the background from there. So I'm going to try to keep the background really simple for this. You can see in the picture it's kind of defocused, so that makes it easier. I just want kind of different tonal arrangements. There's what looks like some grass and some trees, and there's light shining through. There's different tones in the leaves. There are some really light areas where there's a lot of light shining right through. So I want to kind of include all of that. I want to mimic what I see there. I'm not going to worry about making it 100% accurate to the image. I just want to get the same sort of feeling to it. So I want to kind of mimic with my brush strokes the shapes and patterns that I'm seeing in the background of the image. Using a shallow depth of field where we've got a tight focus on the cat here and a out of focus background is a really good photography technique for shifting emphasis to the focused area. And it's also a technique that you can use for your drawing and painting. So yeah, this photo works really well for that. And it gives us a good reference photo where they're already kind of doing that. It might be a choice that I would choose to make if I had a sharp, deep depth of field image as well, just to accentuate the cat and kind of de-emphasize the background. But for this image, that's the way it works, so that works out well for us. I've turned this sideways. You can't really see what I'm doing too well, but what I'm doing is kind of outlining the cat and then painting in a little bit of the background. And I turn it sideways because this way I want to kind of get it done quick, so I'm applying a lot of water, and if it drips, it's not going to drip onto my cat, it's going to drip away, and that's going to work with the background. So those spare drips aren't going to be a big problem as long as they don't get on the cat. That being said, it's always good to have a paper towel around whenever you're working with any sort of wet medium, because sometimes drips happen, sometimes you make mistakes. With the ink especially, sometimes you'll put it on and it'll be darker than you were intending. But if you can dab it with a paper towel, with a clean paper towel, you can oftentimes pull some of the pigment off and avert crisis with the paper towel. So it's good to have that around. Alright, so I kind of got some of the background started here. I've got the form of the cat pretty well defined, and I'm making some progress here. It doesn't really look like much of anything yet, and it's important to understand that this is kind of the process and the way it works. You know, there are a lot of things that work that way in life. When you start out, it doesn't necessarily look the way it's supposed to finish, but if you stick to the process and kind of believe in the efficacy of the process, you should have success, or at least be able to work it to a point where you will be successful in the future. Alright, so I'm applying a little bit of a kind of mid-tone, like a half-tone to this. In this area here. Being careful to kind of maintain that halo area. So a lot of this tone is basically going to be somewhere around here. There's a lot of texture going on as well. So I want to apply my lighter tone first and then add darker texturing. If I've got kind of lighter texturing that's going on, I need to paint around it, and that can be a little bit trickier. So if you are able to apply the lighter tone first and then add the darker tone, that's usually advantageous. One strategy you could use that would be perfectly legitimate is to take a light tone, not just the white of the paper, but a light wash, and apply it to everything that is darker than the highlights. So everything except the highlights. And then you could go in and do your halftone areas on top of that, and then you could go in and do your shadows on top of that, and your deep shadows on top of that. You can layer these As long as you're working from light to dark, it's not a problem. We like to do the shadows first because that kind of helps to define the form better. But you could just work from light to dark, and that would be a perfectly legitimate way of doing it. So typically with things like ink or watercolor, we want to try to work light to dark for the most part. And then with things like paint, acrylic or oil paint, you can work dark to light as well if you want. You can kind of work both ways with those two. And I'm not really paying a lot of attention to what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to get kind of a layer of light tone all over everything. Being careful to avoid painting in those highlights around the cat or in other areas. But other than that, I can kind of do this pretty quick without worrying too much about details. I'm going to go a little bit darker on this shadow here, on the body shadow. So I'm going to get a darker wash here and start applying that. So this is the darkest part of this shadow area. You can see I got it wet. I wet it before I went in and it's starting to spread. That's a cool technique that you can use. It's especially cool for backgrounds where you don't necessarily need to have a lot of control over the ink. So you might experiment with that. That's a really good way to do backgrounds, sometimes with ink or watercolor. So anyway, I'm wanting to darken up this shadow. So I'm starting in the darkest area with my dark ink wash, and then I'm just kind of pulling towards the lighter area to get a little bit of a gradient going on. Another thing to remember is that these layers will build up on top of each other. So if I do two medium washes, it's going to end up being a darker tone. If I do two mediums on top of each other, I'm adding pigment every time I add another layer. Alright, I'm going kind of darker with this whole area here. And I'm hoping that this will try a little bit lighter than this, but we'll see. I think we're still alright. Ink is easy to make mistakes, and it's hard to undo them. So don't get too worried if you mess something up. Remember, this is just a learning process. It's not necessarily about having a perfect product. At the end, it's about kind of learning and experiencing, and hopefully making some improvement each time we do this. So now I'm trying to get a little bit of texture in there, a little bit of that fur texture. So I'm just kind of changing the way I add the strokes in, kind of making shorter, quicker strokes, leaving some areas uncolored. Just kind of working my way over towards that lighter chest area. That was a pretty decent fur pattern. It doesn't take a lot. Alright, so now I'm going to kind of work my way up the leg here. Got some shadow going on here. We also have some interesting textural elements all throughout this kind of light area coming up through the legs and chest. So we want to kind of pay attention to those. I think for this, it's not important that you get every detail 100% accurate. You just kind of want to mimic the patterns and textures that are happening. So the placement of a stripe or a tuft of fur or a light area is not necessarily super duper important, but just trying to mimic the feel of it with your ink will probably do well enough. Alright, so we're going to work back into this shadow here. This is kind of the darkest, deepest part of the shadow. So this is where I'm adding my ink. I'm going to kind of pull it from there. We also have a lot of interesting textural elements here that are happening, a lot of kind of stripes and lines. So I want to kind of curve these lines a little bit, create a little bit of a cross contour effect. And that'll show the kind of curve of the leg there. And I want to kind of keep the shadow deep along that edge and then kind of pull the ink from there over to into the texture. And if I need to add a little more shadow, I can do that as well. So I'm just trying to look at and notice some of the interesting shapes and patterns that I see and add those. I want to try to keep them similar to where they're at in my reference photo. But again, it's not super necessary that everything be 100% accurate. We're trying to keep this fairly loose. So we just kind of want to mimic those textures. While I'm using kind of a darker ink, I'm going to go in and get the mouth here, as well as some of the details around the muzzle. Got some stripes right here. Got some of these little chin stripes. Here's the bottom of the chin. It creates a little shadow, and then we got a little bit of texture under there, that neck fur. So now I'm adding a little bit of darker texture. I'm just kind of dabbing it on wherever it feels right. I'm trying to mimic the shadow shapes that are created by that fur. You got a lot of kind of shorter, fluffier fur in that neck area. So I'm trying to get some of that in there. And I want to use like a dark ink, but not pure ink. I want a little bit of watering down in there. Add some more of these stripes. If they're too dark, you might have a lot of contrast at first, but as we kind of add more tone and shadow, it should blend in fairly well. Add a little more texture over here while I've got the dark ink on the brush. Kind of layering that up, making it more complex, adding different values on top of each other. We want to make multiple passes on the texture. That'll kind of layer it, which will give it more tonal complexity, but it also just kind of add different values of ink, because you're going to have a little bit different value from time to time as you kind of dip the brush and adjust the wash. And darken this chin on a little bit. So adding dark ink can be kind of scary, because if you mess it up, it's stuck. So a good way to do that is maybe make a pass with something lighter. See that you like the shape. Evaluate where the tone is at, and make sure that you need to go darker before you add the darker ink to it. I'm going real dark here now. It's going to be tricky to judge because it does, again, dry a little bit lighter than when you apply it, as you've seen throughout the process here. Kind of got this fluffy sort of shadow formation coming down through here. I'm using little like wide U shapes or little sideways C shapes. I see a lot of those shapes in that neck area. You can also put just some kind of random little strokes in there. Fur is kind of chaotic, makes a lot of random patterns and whatnot, you know. Just kind of layering this texture and building it up. So we tend to have a lot of texture in these light areas, and then a little less in the shadows. The shadows kind of unify, but in our light areas we can have a lot of texture going on. Alright, so I'm going to add some of this kind of dark patch on the forehead here. Makes it look like he's got weird eyebrows now, eh? So a lot of times when you add something like these weird eyebrows, your brain's going to say, that looks weird, that looks like weird eyebrows. But that's kind of chatter. You have to reevaluate. You have to evaluate whether things are looking accurate or not. Just because it looks like weird eyebrows doesn't mean it's always going to be. Actually, I decided this was a little too dark and went in and did a little dab on there. When you do a little dab to pull some of the ink off, you want to make sure that you've got a clean paper towel, that you don't have any wet ink on the paper towel, because that can really mess things up quickly. So you want to adjust to a clean spot, dab it, and then readjust before you dab again. You don't want to just kind of dab haphazardly. That might be a good way to get texture on in some situations, but if you're trying to do cleanup, it can be a real disaster. Alright, we're adding a little more tone in here, kind of around that muzzle area. And it's starting to look pretty good. We've definitely got some sparse areas still, but that texture under the chin is really starting to come together. Hopefully it is for you as well. So now we're going to add in some more facial details. So I'm going to add some shadow to these ears here. So we've got some interesting shadows going on in the ears, some interesting forms that we're going to define by capturing those shadows. So we want to put it a little darker in here. And then there's some light areas too. There's some complexity to the way the light is interacting with these. So try to look at those. I'm doing a fine line here. I've got a filbert brush. If I turn the filbert brush sideways, I can get a fine line. And then if I turn it the other direction, I can get kind of a broader stroke. So it's a really useful brush. It doesn't necessarily do every job as well as a specialized brush, but it can do all the jobs better than most brushes. I'm adding in a little bit of a dark line under the upper eyelids. There's a shadow that kind of naturally accrues there in a linear shape. This happens on people and cats very often because the light source is usually coming from above. Adding a little more of that texture, kind of spreading it out from this dark patch. We got a little going on here. Over here as well. And it's really starting to define that face. And we will work in some darker halftones into this as we work. There's not going to be so much contrast in the end. But we want to lay this in. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit darker now. Just kind of add kind of a darker wash here. You may not need to do this, depending on how your wash came out first. It's just kind of, this is not so much a step-by-step as a concept-by-concept sort of guide this time. Yeah, so we're adding more of a middle tone. I think we had kind of a light tone earlier. Now we're going more towards the middle here. And as you can see, that's really starting to unify that texture. And I might think about maintaining some of that texture as I apply that middle tone. Not necessarily like painting in everything completely, leaving some light patches poking through. That'll give it more of a fur textured appearance. If it gets too dark, you can dab it. Just make sure your paper towel is clean. As a little dab. You can see that adds a little bit of texture to it as well. It's not necessarily a bad mistake to make. It's one of those happy accidents. Got a little more texture in here. A little more shadow in this crevice here. I'll lighten that up a little. It gets scary sometimes. Sometimes you freak yourself out a little bit. Who knows? It may have been fine if it had dried. I don't know. I'm finishing off the feet here. I know it's a little out of frame there. That's okay. Just kind of bringing a shadow around the bottom of the paw there is all. I'm not doing a lot of detail on the feet. The reference image doesn't have a ton of detail on the feet. They're kind of in the grass there. So I'm just kind of following that, keeping them simple. I'll add some darker stripes throughout. I want to keep maybe some of my medium or medium dark stripes as well to really build up that texture. I'm kind of disheveling that a little bit, mixing it up a little bit. I maybe should have gone with more of a curved stripe, get a little bit of a cross contour effect in there. That's okay, but you might if you haven't done that yet. Then dab a little bit. I'm getting a little nervous, as you can tell. Things are going pretty well so far. Nervous about wrecking it, so if you get nervous, there's no reason not to dab it. Make sure your paper towel is clean. Be careful when you do it, but you know, you can pull that off. You can add it back later if you need it. So basically, the way we draw this, it should basically seem like a cat slowly coming into focus. It should be real simple and kind of almost blurry at the beginning, but as we work, it should get crisper and cleaner and more focused, and we should be able to see more nuance to the shading. Alright, so I went in and did his little nose there. I'm going to add some dots. These dots are where the whiskers attach. So I've kind of got these little dots on its muzzle here. I'm just kind of dabbing those with my paintbrush. Just a little tiny dot of ink. I'm going to re-darken the eyelids a little bit. Add a little bit of texture. I got my dark ink on there. Got some texture happening on that forehead, the fur. Add a little bit in here. We got some fur in there. We got some dark shadow shapes. We're going to crisp up some of those edges a little bit. You always want to think about how you can use the ink that you've got in different areas throughout the drawing. Painting? Drawing? I'm not sure what this is. We're going to draw on it a little bit at the end. And now I'm going to add the kind of background here. Again, this is just kind of keeping it really kind of loose and blurry. I don't want a lot of detail on this. I'm just going to kind of add different tones. I'm going to try to mimic the shape of the different light and shadow elements that we have here. But I'm going to keep it really kind of unfocused and vague. We want to give the impression of some grass and maybe some foliage back behind it. Again, I flipped my paper. This time I turned it upside down. That's to kind of allow the drips to drip downward where there's nothing they're going to run into. I blocked in a little kind of cloud shape. That's just a space I'm going to keep kind of lighter because I've got some light showing through the tree back there. I don't want to cover that all up right away, so I'm going to just try to remember that I want that there as we proceed. So there's a lot of like interesting shapes where the light's peeking through. I'm going to try to mimic some of those. I think I got a little bit dark with my outline there, but that's okay. I'm going to try to add some more darkness around it, kind of make a more natural transition. This doesn't look like anything yet, but it usually doesn't until it does, so that's okay. Don't freak out. It's really important to kind of get through the awkward phases with your drawing. It's a lot like growing up, you know? You got to get through those awkward phases. We're not all defined by the awkward phases we go through, you know? But we can learn from them, and they're an important part of who we become. So, you know, try not to worry too much about it. Just try to figure out how to solve the problem. If you worry too much about your problems and not enough about how to solve them, well, they're not going away, are they? And you create another problem for yourself, which is that you're worried about them. So yeah, this is looking like a hot mess of a background right now, but I'm gonna have faith that this is gonna pull through in the end. We'll see how it goes. I'm gonna dab it a little bit, try to get kind of that texture mixed up a little bit. Oh boy. What the heck are we gonna do about that? Don't you worry, I've got this figured out. I know what to do. Just gonna kind of keep dabbing on different tonal values, keeping things really loose and impressionistic, but just kind of almost random mark making. I've got a little bit of an idea of what I want to do, but it's almost, there's a little bit of randomness to it as well. Got a little more shadow going on right here. There's kind of a shadowy patch on the ground I'm going to try to replicate. Adding a little tone down here. Again, this is out of frame, unfortunately. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm just trying to kind of replicate the shadow shapes that I see on there. Give it a little variation. Now in the foreground, I'm kind of making some grass-like strokes. So the grass that's like at the same distance as the cat, or around that, is going to be in focus, just like the cat is. So I add a little bit of grass stroke kind of shapes. So the way I'm doing this is I'm applying a little more pressure at the beginning of the stroke and then lifting the brush off to get kind of that point at the end. I'm really still freaked out about this background up here, so I'm going to fuss with it a little bit more. It's like I had my child paint the background. Not my child now. She's good at this stuff now, but like when she was like 3. So had some 3-year-old guest come and do this background. That's okay though. That's okay. We're getting there. I'm making a lot of jokes, but you can't get too distressed with the process. You gotta be solution oriented. That's the word for it. Alright, so now I'm just kind of trying to get this finished up and move along. So yeah, I'm adding a little more tone where I need it. I'm not trying to get too fancy or complex with the values, just trying to kind of fill things in while maintaining some of that texture. You can see my grass strokes from earlier have had a little time to dry, so I'm able to add some more tone in on top of them or behind them or whatever, however you see that. Alright, this would probably be a good place just about here to pause if you need to catch up and get a little time. Try to get it to around here. Again, you don't have to have all the same details as me. Just wanted to be about this phase in your drawing. And then we're going to get out the pen and add a couple of details and that'll be it. Alright, so now we're going to add some details with the pen. You could use a dip pen for this if you were so inclined. They're a little tricky. They're called dip pens, but I call them drip pens because they drip. You gotta be careful. But I'm just adding some finishing details here. I'm using a Uniball Vision pen. I like them because they're waterproof and they have a nice ink. So I added a little bit of detail in the mouth there, a little bit of a crisper edge. Now I'm adding the pupils here to the eyes. The cat's kind of got like an upward angle to its gaze. Kind of put them right in the center in the beginning, but it's a little more upward. I'm going to add a little bit of lining around the eyes here. One thing with adding lines to your ink painting is the the areas where you add lines are going to tend to become focal points. So if you want to draw attention to an area, add more detail to it, and it'll tend to draw attention. I'm going to add some whiskers in. It'd be cool if I had a white pen to use that for the whiskers. I think that would be a nice detail. I'm not really going to worry about that. I'm just kind of going to use my Uniball, but that would be a good idea. I don't think it would go amiss. I think you can add a little bit of texture to the fur here and there if you want. Kind of up to you. You can play around with this as much as you want. This is really about kind of analyzing your drawing here and deciding where you would want additional details. I'm adding a little bit of line work to some of the grass texture down here. You can't see it. It's off camera, but that's what I'm doing there. Same sort of idea there. I'm going to crisp it up, make it a little sharper, give it a little more definition. A little more texture in here. And you can add line work wherever you want. You know, you can kind of use your judgment on this. You don't have to do everything exactly the same way I'm doing it. Just kind of picking random spots. A little bit of line work on the chin there. I think that sharpened it up a little bit. Also want to do a little bit of an outline on the halo here, especially up where I've got real light tone in the sky here, just to kind of define the edge of my cat here. And I'm not making like a straight line, I'm kind of making a fur texture to the line work. And I'm breaking it up a little bit, kind of making it a broken line. Alright, and there we go. So that's our cat. So yeah, add as much line work as you want. If you get to this point and you need to readjust colors or values or textures, you can go back to the brush and work with that some more too. There's no problem there. But just try to, get it to your satisfaction at this point. So I think that's going to conclude our cat drawing for the most part. So feel free to pause it here if you need to and get it finished up. I'm not super stoked on that background, but it's fine. We did all right. The cat looks pretty good. I'm going to add a little bit of tone to the face here because I don't think it's as light as I rendered it there. So we're just going to add a little bit there. When you go over again with tone like this, you want to make sure everything underneath is dry. This is all pretty waterproof stuff once it's dry, but if it's still liquid, it can move around a lot. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will see you next time on Painting with Rob Boss. Goodbye.